Hello and welcome back to MLQ Replay. Week 3 is in the book for the 2025 season, and we're here to break down all the action. Myself, Ethan Sturm, alongside Ben Mertens. 2 more series into the books, and we're here to talk all about them. Ben, how you doing tonight?
Great.
Awesome. So we are going to start in the North Division, where the Chicago Prow, who've made 2 straight runs to the MLQ Finals over the last 2 seasons, took on the upstart Cleveland Riff, who, as you and Resh were talking about in week 1, got off to start with a 3-0 start to the season against Toronto. That came to an abrupt halt in the series against Chicago, with Chicago taking the sweep in pretty dominant fashion, 190-30, 220-80, and 220-50. Obviously, Ben, even with that 3-0 for Cleveland, this is always going to be a tall task. Coming up against a team who's had so much success in recent years. That said, what did Chicago show you in this series that maybe has you excited about if they can finally take that next step to be an actual championship team?
All right. So first thing that I like to see is when I was taking a look at the rosters this weekend, Chicago had no Darian Mercick-Ellis, no Ali Manzella, no Ben Peachy, no Liam Zock, and they still essentially walked all over Cleveland, which is great to see. They controlled the pace of the series. The only times that Cleveland was really able to get into a good half-court offense was when Chicago seemed to let them do so, because they tried out several different defenses over the course of the weekend. When Chicago was in that more aggressive press, which is what I would expect them to see come championships, Cleveland could barely get into the flow of their offense. A lot of possessions where they had to lob deep passes, got rushed, made bad mistakes. Essentially, the only offense they could consistently generate was Joe Lombardi ripping some very long shots. And the thing there is not a ton of height on the hoops for Chicago, so that was why that was there. But again, Darren coming back at some point will be helpful there. Ben Peachy potentially point or hoops would put more height on the field for them. So even that one minor hole that was exposed is something I think they can easily clean up. And otherwise, they just had total control of this series.
Yeah, for sure. Like you said, definitely, playing a little bit more into their depth with a number of players, as you said, not with the team this weekend. But obviously, I think also 2 important returns to talk about when you talk about this performance this weekend. Obviously, Matt Brown, who took the season off last year, is back with the team and basically could do whatever he wanted on that pitch this weekend. Often was just posting up literally at the halfway point of the field. You mentioned how Cleveland couldn't get into their half-court rhythm. It's because they were losing exchanges repeatedly against control at midfield, basically, and that makes it almost impossible to play the game of quadball. The stats kind of bear it out as well. I know the stats aren't out yet. For everybody, we have limited stats to go on, so it's not going to be what we can usually do on this show, but we'll do our best here. And then also the return of Riley Andrews, who was with the team last year, but played limited, was injured for championships, could not play at championships. Riley Andrews, I think, is one of the most, more unheralded parts of this core over the last few years in the program. Always a firebrand, always someone who can find ways to get goals when they're available, and did so again this series. So, I think we can talk, some about the young players that came in, but also some of the veterans who came back, who are back to being the same old key parts of this program.
Yeah, in between those 2 groups is Justin Cole, who is not new to the sport, but is new to Chicago Prowl. Thought his chemistry, especially with Nathan Digman, was excellent right from Jump Street. A lot of give and goes between the 2 of them. Justin doing what he does, finding a lot of space behind the hoops and finishing plays, and if it's not there, just kicking it back out. Riley Andrews, I agree, was excellent. They sorely missed him last year. 2 years ago in their first run of the finals, there were portions where he was their best quad ball player, and he looked excellent out there this weekend. Didn't look like he was pushing it too much. He took goals that were there, and if it wasn't there, just was also able to settle things down too. He was able to be a facilitator or an off-ball player, which is one of the things that makes Prowl so deadly, right? Is almost all of their players can be on-ball or off-ball players, and you saw that in the distribution of goals and assists. When those full stats come out, it's going to be really impressive.
Yeah. If I'm going to nitpick on what's, a blowout performance, I did think the defensive rotations when Cleveland did get to play half court, which again, as we talked about, was limited, could have been a little bit better. I do think there were some passing opportunities that were there, and Cleveland maybe would bobble the pass or something like that. But ultimately, the cut was there, and a team who's playing Chicago in the finals in 2 months isn't going to bobble that pass. So I'd like to see a little bit more about the rotations. Less worried about the shots, like you said. They're just missing some of their hoop sight at this series. And then again, it's not going to be matter when all these players kind of flow back in, but it did feel like when you didn't have, whether it was Riley Andrews or Justin Cole or Digman or Kenny Murphy, who also had 10 assists, 5 goals in the series, as they were in their quad ball depth, sometimes things slowed down a bit. They weren't executing as well. They weren't getting quite as many goals in the half court. Probably something that's not going to matter when this team just brings in all that talent that you've already mentioned. But, hey, it's sometimes you got to nitpick when a team's just running away with the series.
Yeah, it's exactly what we talked about in week 1 with New York against Washington, right? A team like in Chicago shoes is playing for August as much as they're playing for this weekend. Obviously, the goal of the weekend was to get the 3 wins, but in terms of what you want to see with the goal of a championship in August, the half-court stuff on both sides could be a little better. I thought Cleveland, to your point, was able to get into that back corner, which is a really dangerous space, and then the pass got dropped, or the one more pass was there, and the young Cleveland chaser with someone from Chicago bearing down on them didn't see that one extra pass, but teams like New York, San Antonio, come championships, will see those plays. So they can clean that up a little bit. And then their half court, very composed on the first line. And I think the third group, which is the group Riley Andrews was on, very composed. That middle group was still putting up plenty of goals because they're playing transition so much, but their half court, a couple times where someone ran right at a hoop with a defender on it and got stuffed because Cleveland, one thing we shouted out in their win over Toronto this weekend, very physical at the hoops. And there was another, someone standing like this at the open hoops that got missed a couple times. That's something they can clean up as the season goes on. They scored like 20 goals per game in this series, so it's really, really not that big of a deal, but that would be the nitpicks.
For sure. On the other side of the ball, you already mentioned Joe Lombardi, who just continues to star for this team at this point. I mean, a player who came up in the Syracuse program. If you had to scout a lot for Northeast college quad ball, as I had to when he was in college, I can tell you that we all knew he was there. But really just kind of see him kind of continue to take off, and that shot, he really has it from anywhere on the field. And I mean, you mentioned the physicality as well. That's so exciting to see. Sometimes you see in these real mismatches. I think you saw a little bit in the other series. That there'll be times when, if it's no dodgeballs, the team with the talent gap is just running down the field, and it's not, nobody's even playing quad ball. Cleveland made Chicago earn those fast breaks. They were almost always had to make a pass. It was never just going end to end with the ball. And to Chicago's credit, they can obviously make that one pass, but you mentioned that physicality. I think really just what Cleveland ran into is Chicago was able to exploit a little bit more. That Cleveland doesn't necessarily have that true number one beater. And that's something Toronto couldn't really exploit. So then you're playing more of an even quad ball game. And Cleveland has a lot of quad ball talent. They're physical and they've got some stars. But when you're up against a team who has some of these really top beaters, like a team like Chicago does, it just becomes really hard to play the game if you can't achieve any parity in that regard.
Yeah, this is always one of the hardest things to practice for. Back when I was a Washington Admiral, we knew that Boston with Max Havlin and Lulu were going to try to press us, and we tried to practice it. And it's not the same when you're doing it with your own beaters versus a true top-tier elite beating program like Chicago. It's very hard to prepare for. It always makes you a little deer in the headlights the first time you see it. So Cleveland, this could be a learning experience. This is a young team. This is a ton of pressure put on them by a team that's contending for a championship, and it definitely threw them off, and their beaters just weren't prepared for it, which is not surprising given the difference in experience, talent, all that sort of thing. They can learn and improve from this. Long term, they've already pretty much punched in a ticket for championships, but as this team wants to continue to grow in the coming years, that's where the development has to come. Is their beaters need to take a step forward, at least get to the point where you can prevent this from happening. You don't have to be able to necessarily inflict this on all your opponents. That's really hard to do, but you have to be able to do enough to stop this from happening. The most frustrating thing that can happen, which Matt Brown pulled off like 8 times in the series, is the other team's beater meets you at half court, you exchange, and you don't just lose the exchange. The other beater catches your beat. You're out. They call up the builder. They don't have to pick up their own dodgeball. They're just going right at your ball. How many of your offense is gone? And Matt Brown did that like 8 times in the series. So tough sledding. I've been there. But the good stuff, the physicality was there in the chasing game. Joe made a lot happen. I think he got into a position where Chicago knew he was the main threat and keyed down, and he still was able to kind of manufacture something that's really impressive to see. And then they were getting to the right spots, but as we kind of talked about in the Chicago segment, too many bobbled passes, too many drops. This team can get more players who are able to catch the ball, take 1 or 2 steps, and swing the next pass. They'll be able to find more goals instead of kind of relying on Joe's hero ball, and that'll be the next step for the Chaser program. So there's takeaways from this. It's good to play teams like this. That's one of the benefits in MLQ.
Yeah, I think those exchanges are something they can really focus on and tape. You mentioned nothing more frustrating than, the catch and losing the exchange, but there's also some exchanges at that exact point where they didn't do a skill, a throw, or anything. They just got beat still holding the ball. That's the second worst thing you can do. You need to come into that exchange knowing you're going to have to take it and having some plan to it. So, something you can take away, because ultimately, I mean, this team's already, put away Toronto. I feel like their eyes are probably on their Detroit series. I mean, that's a chance to get to the top half, to the third place spot in the division if they can win that series. But across the field, it's going to be a player like Ryan Sue, who's also going to make you pay if you can't, take any exchanges against him. So they're going to need to be ready for that. Now that we've seen both Detroit and Cleveland, what do you think about a potential series between those teams?
The big thing is what we were just talking about. If Ryan and the beating core over there in Detroit can just take over the field like this, Cleveland needs to learn quickly how to counter that because they weren't able to do it in this series. But those are great beaters. They're not quite the Chicago beaters, in my opinion, which means there might be a little more room for Cleveland maneuver. And now they've seen it. Like I was saying, it's very hard to practice against just with your own team. They've seen it at the highest possible level. Now at least they know this is going to happen to us. What's our plan? Because if this is going to happen to you and your beaters are going to lose even 75% of the exchanges, but you say, when this happens, someone's going to be here deep behind the hoops as the release valve, and we are at least going to be able to generate a look out of it instead of getting beat at half court, throwing the ball out of bounds or whatever. That's going to go a long way. You might be able to manufacture 1 or 2 goals, especially because Detroit's a less disciplined chaser team than Chicago. They could possibly overextend on the press. So that whole series is going to come down to how Chicago counters the press attempts from Detroit, who's going to try to do exactly what Chicago did this weekend.
Yeah. And obviously on Chicago's side, I don't think, outside of us being happy with, the way the bottom half of the roster was able to perform, I don't think there's going to be a ton of takeaways that's going to make anybody feel differently about their title chances. You probably feel exactly how you did about them before the season started, whatever those opinions were. I think their real test, as we talked about last week, will be the Minneapolis series. Will at least get us a little bit better idea of, how everything stands there. But then they might not get another test till champs, as a lot of title contenders often do. So it's really about, staying focused and, knowing that those big series hit late in the season, but they kind of come on all at once and you don't necessarily get a lot of lead up to it. So, but having done this now 3 years in a row, it's something they're probably prepared for.
Yeah. I mean, they know what teams are going to be waiting for them in the semifinals and finals. That's where the focus is. So I think this was just business as usual for Chicago.
Awesome. So let's talk to the head coach of Chicago and friend of the program, Kennedy Murphy. Kennedy, thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, we talked about kind of the young kind of roster you guys brought in this weekend, and, whether it was for, strategic reasons or just availability reasons, and you don't have to disclose if you don't want. Obviously, you guys were playing with a lot of the younger half of your roster. So what did you see out of them this weekend? How did you feel about their performance?
Yeah, I think it was around like half of the roster was new to MLQ or Chicago. We have a lot of college players this year, especially from the Illini program. And they've been putting a lot of work in this summer. They're calling it Illini Summer Camp Prawl. So they impressed me with their knowledge of the strategy. Obviously, we have some refining to do, which just happens with people new to MLQ. But yeah, I'm liking what I'm seeing out of them so far.
So, obviously also returning some players, Matt Brown coming back, Riley Andrews not being injured, and also didn't play club much this year for USQ either. Talk about the kind of the impacts those two players have had for the program over the last few years.
Yes. Super important to Chicago area quadball, whether that's MLQ or USQ. Matt is just such a knowledgeable player and helps contribute to strategy and captaining other players, whether they're chasers or beaters or chasers. So amazing to have him back this summer. And Riley is such a spark plug for our offense and defense. I actually got to play with him for maybe the first time like on field on the same line this weekend. So that was really fun to experience it myself.
Awesome. So taking on a Cleveland team this week that, as we said, was coming off that 3-0 win, you guys have kind of had front row seats to kind of see this renaissance of Cleveland, as it were. I mean, I remember a few years back when they won one game against Minneapolis, and it was the biggest deal in the world that they won a game. Obviously, now they're winning series and playing, I'd say, much more, at least actively, against you guys. What have you kind of seen from the way this team has come up over the last few years?
Yeah, I think they have put so much into the development of their team and their talent. And it's always a great thing when you've seen a team not be able to fulfill like the full roster, whether it's the 30 or the 21, and then come in with some new college players. You can tell that they're putting a lot of work into that region. I'm really impressed with the coaching. It looked like a different team even from the previous season to this one, and I hope they continue on that trend. It just makes the North even stronger.
So we haven't had a chance to talk, at least on air, since you guys went to the championships last year and did lose that series, of course. You've now made the championship 2 straight years. Yeah, I think the first year it surprised a lot of people. The second year, I think a lot of people expected it. What were the different lessons you learned in the 2 ways you guys kind of came into those years?
Yeah, honestly, I was surprised the first time around too. And then the second time, it was just frustrating to make it that far and then have so many pieces fall apart and not be able to put out what we thought could be our best showing. I think we're the only MLQ team to make it to the finals 2 years in a row and lose both times. So that stings, and it's definitely motivation as a coach and a player and the whole team to not let that happen again.
Sure. So, you mentioned all the injuries you guys did pick up last year, and I think possibly, is why it's good that you guys are getting so much of that young talent kind of playing. What players do you kind of see as potentially being keys to kind of come in and maybe fill some of those roles, whether veterans are out or unavailable, et cetera?
Yeah. So I think Melanie Rolfe is going to be a big piece for us going through the end of the season. She's been part of the team since the indie days and has been on Boom Train since she graduated from Columbia. And then, of course, it's great to have Matt back. But younger players, this year we have Camilla, who is back from last year, who is playing huge minutes, improved so much over the USQ season, and played amazingly this weekend. And we also have Leah Osborne and Amelia Wink. They're brand new. They're both in college, brand new to MLQ. They had a good showing this weekend as well. And we're trying out a lot of new beater pairs. And I think that those younger players are bringing something fresh to people who have been on the team for a long time.
Awesome. So obviously you guys, I think most people have you picked to be the favorites in the North Division. And, you do have a lot of series where you come in similar to this. Sometimes, compared to what last year in the South Division, which was just absolutely a dogfight in every single series, and sometimes the top of the East Division. So how do you find ways to continue to improve and develop every single series, no matter the results, even if they aren't maybe the competitive series, or maybe teams aren't testing you to your fullest?
Yeah, we analyze the film, all of the coaches, and send feedback to all of the players, no matter what series it is. So we're in the process of that for Cleveland right now. And then we look to for improvements we can make in our next practice weekend while looking forward to the upcoming series. So we're always learning from what we previously did and looking forward to the next series.
Kenny, I had one question that was similar but different from what Ethan asked before about, you guys have come really close 2 years in a row. What was just at the start of the year the message to the team and the way to keep the team focused coming off those 2 years that are both really exciting but also disappointing to come up short? How do you keep everyone on the same page? What was just your message to the team? So I think you're pretty well known in the sport as like a great leader, a good emotional leader. So what was just the message to the team?
Yeah, it was what we've done previously is what a second place team does. So if you want to win, you have to have a first place mentality the rest of the season. You can't do what you've been doing the previous 2 seasons.
Love it.
Okay, are we still doing the book quotes? The book quotes, are they still part of the coaching?
No, I have not continued the book quotes. I think I'm getting far enough away from that first season where I could start recycling them again. I have had requests to have more quotes, so I'll work on that.
Awesome. Well, best of luck to Chicago the rest of the season. We'll obviously be watching closely, and best of luck to you and your team.
Thanks so much.
All right, so we're going to jump over to the East Division series where Washington traveled across the border to take on Ottawa. Also a pretty convincing series for the team that I think most people consider the favorite, with Washington winning 230-95, 265-30, and 240-85. Ben, you're very familiar, I know personally, with the Washington program. And, it's a program that I think we've seen a lot of different iterations of. You think of a program like Boston. I mean, Max Havlin and Lewis Hsu have been a part of that program since day one. This team is so young. We've seen stars come and go. We've seen people be transplants briefly and leave. What are your opinions on this current iteration of Washington now that we've seen half of their season?
Well, we've seen the two kind of least interesting series for testing them, so it's still hard to make a judgment right. Everyone expected them to lose to New York, which they did, although I thought their performance was better against New York this year than last year, which maybe is not what everyone would have expected. And they crushed Ottawa, which is what they usually do. I will say they were even more impressive against Ottawa this year than they've been even in the past couple seasons, and just how they refused to let Ottawa do anything at all and just completely controlled the pace of the series, which is good to see. And that my biggest enthusiasm about watching this year, because in terms of the talent level, it's a similar team to last year. They have some new exciting pieces, especially the young UVA players. They've got a mix of old players and younger players, but it's not that different of a group on paper from previous seasons. I'm very excited for what they're trying to do. They look much more like they have a plan on every offensive possession. I don't always think that it's the right plan, but they do have a plan on every offensive possession. And on defense, they are running what I think is the most aggressive press I've ever seen in MLQ, where their beaters are meeting the half court, just like talked about, but they have all four chasers just marking up completely, leaving the hoops and just taking away every passing option, just trying to completely deny anything, which is incredibly aggressive. It's not at all what they've done in the past. And the fact that they feel confident to do that against Ottawa, but they also tried it at points against New York, I think is a great sign that they feel like they can do more than they've accomplished in last year. So I am really curious to see what happens against Charlotte and Boston, teams who are going to be able to put up more resistance in Ottawa, and see if Washington continues to try to be this aggressive on defense, and if they can continue to grow this offense, which I know is a totally new system that their new coach, John Gaffigan, has instituted. And there are times when they swing a couple of passes, the beaters and chasers are on the same page and they get a great call of it. There are also times where it looks a little disjointed, so I think they're still figuring that out. But I do think the ceiling is higher, even if the on-paper talent looks similar, because they look like more of a cohesive team so far this year.
Yeah, you mentioned, even more of a convincing beatdown than we've seen at times in the past. And, the stats bear that out. I believe it was last season where Adrian Koretsky broke the single series plus-minus record for a beater. And then Comborn absolutely crushed that this year in this series. When those stats come out, you'll be able to see. But I agree with that, what you're saying about the press and, being able to show different things and having a plan, I think is a big part of it. The only real stumble was the first, 5-10 minutes of game one. And, it's hard to hold teams' feet to the fire for first game of the day jitters. But really, I thought it was the period where Ottawa was able to stay a little bit more even in the beater game. And that did have me a little bit worried because, that's always been kind of the bugaboo for Washington. It's obviously not at all what happened in game two. I mean, that first shift from Colin and Koretsky just kind of blew the lid off the game very quickly. When I think it was kind of matchups, I kind of liked on the Ottawa side the way Sean Barros was playing in the beater game. I thought was able to win some exchanges, which is what you have to do, if a team's going to press you that high. But yeah, I mean, it was a dominant performance by Washington, to say the least. The offense was clicking, but yeah, I think one thing that was very interesting to kind of see when we see a international series like this, and obviously World Cup a few weeks away, so international concepts kind of front of mind, is to see the difference in the way the offensive beating is being used. Because Washington was doing a lot of what we're seeing a ton of at this point in the American game. Whether you want to call it hammer or whatnot, even against 2-2 though, of just tapping a hoop defender on one side as the ball swings to that side, whether it's on a cutter or someone who's in a position to drive. Ottawa's still running a lot of 1.5 when they had control. We saw a ton of that in this series. And I think two things are interesting there. I mean, I think most Americans just agree that, doing hammers is slightly cleaner at this point. But I also think something I've noticed as, college coach is that a lot of younger beaters in the American game aren't super prepared for 1.5 anymore because they don't see it very much anymore. And I do think if it wasn't for the point defense, players like Mulcahy and Stars of Washington that was able to shut down Ottawa, even when there were no dodgeballs off those 1.5s, it could have been a little bit more of a problem for Washington.
Yeah, actually, The one American team that still does a fair amount of that is actually Chicago, who broke it out against Cleveland. To your point, Cleveland has a bunch of young beaters, and they look like they've never seen it before. Washington was not to that level, but there were plays where Ottawa got in there, got either the person on the ground or got forced them to throw the dodgeball and takes a bad ricochet, which I think is the mistake a lot of beaters make when they're seeing 1.5 is like, let me just beat this beater out. The ball can go flying if you throw it in a panic because you're about to get hit, and then the other team got what they wanted, right, which is several seconds, no dodgeball situations. Ottawa just was really struggling to convert on their no dodgeball situations. The passing and catching wasn't clean. They would try to drive through two players because the passing and catching wasn't clean, things like that. But your point is well taken. Like the 1.5 did create some openings for them. And Washington has a lot of beaters who, like Colin and Adrian, are not as young as you and I might think there because of someone like Max Havington who's been around for 10 years. They've been playing a good number of MLQ years at this point. But 1.5 is an old idea that just like players grew up and played their entire college careers without seeing a team really throw that. So it's interesting to see. It obviously didn't come anywhere close to swinging this series, but it is something that, like, I think when you see something like that, or what happened to Cleveland against Chicago, more teams could put that in their back pocket as like a twice a game thing, just to try to keep the other team off their toes.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just it's MLQ 10th anniversary year, so just a kind of small history lesson. I mean, there was a time when 1.5 first became a thing where, as a community, nobody could figure out how to break it. Like nobody knew what the response was, and it took almost like half a season for people to figure it out. There were some rule changes that kind of helped with that as well. But like you said, a lot of it's just kind of, staying away from the person more so than trying to beat them or anything like that. It's using your legs, but that's not, I think, as for a lot of beaters, it's not the most natural thing to do. But yeah, I mean, I do think, to Washington's credit, against those 1.5s, they were always looking to fast break, knowing that the dodgeballs would be out of position. And they did get a lot of goals after they were able to get those stops. And, part of it, like we were saying, was that when Mulcahy and Stars were, streaking down the field, nobody could really stay in front of them. They always had a passing option running with them. So they were able to get a lot of assists as well. Stars, to his credit, finished with a triple-double, 10 goals, 12 assists, 10 stops. Pretty rare in MLQ, so pretty awesome to see in that as well. But yeah, on the Ottawa side, we've players that I think we know have the ability. We saw some of that. I mean, I think Hale Yap had some very good moments on ball. I think one of the things that Ottawa was doing is I liked Ottawa best when it wasn't their primary drivers bringing the ball down. It was one of their non-primary drivers, because I think it made Washington have to think a little bit more. The passing options were a little bit better, and I think they were able to get, maybe not goals, but at least better looks that way. But yeah, I mean, I'd like to see a little bit more from the younger half of the Ottawa roster, because when I was seeing, those kind of moments from Ottawa, it was players that, I am a little bit more familiar with, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, when you're trying to break down a half-court offense, there's, like, big picture, there's two things you can do. Your ball handler can just be better than their point defender, or you have some sort of coherent offensive idea to generate goals. And Ottawa did not show a ton of that. To your point, it was best when they were having not their best driver bring up the ball and then swing it to that person off the ball, or use the threat of where they were to shift the defense, and that opened up some drives and shots for other players. But goals were just super hard to come by for them, and there was too much of trying to just go through a point defender when you clearly just didn't have the matchup. The 1.5s, again, even if you're not going to run hammer, I'd like to see more of like the beaters just trying to, at the top of the zone, if you can't beat the keeper, beat the other chaser at the top of the 2-2 zone that Washington had, and just then swing the ball to that side, but just try to create a lane or something, because they just weren't able to get through those point defenders, which is no shame to Ottawa's drivers, right? Riley and Brian are two of the best point defenders in the sport, but as a team, you have to have an idea of what are we going to try to do when we just can't beat the other team's point defender.
For sure. So, you say a little hard to tell because they probably played their two least interesting series, but I'm going to put you on the spot because now they have to go and play their two more interesting series. We've seen all three teams, I guess, in the middle of this East Division play at this point. How do you think Washington falls amongst the Bostons and the Charlottes of the world this season?
I think they are going to beat Charlotte. I think they have, Washington is 15-1 all-time, 16-1 all-time against Charlotte. Like, it is not as competitive a series as people think, because Charlotte usually keeps it close and then Washington wins it at the end. And Charlotte, despite bringing back most of their team, looked to me relatively disjointed in that Boston series. There still is not just enough composure. And like we were discussing, I really like the composure I'm seeing for Washington's offense. I think where Washington could be in the trouble is if they do want to bring up this press, which I want to see them try, but it's not working. If they can't pivot away from it and drop into something a little more conservative, because Charlotte is the type of team with how good, but how sometimes reckless their beaters are. You can actually like be more effective dropping your defense and making them overcommit and then springing the press on them. And if they're overcommitting at the start, Charlotte might be able to find some easy goals off of that. But Washington's played Charlotte a ton of times. I just trust them to win that matchup. I don't have a great read on Boston yet because I think there were two Boston teams in that series. There was Boston when Max and Lulu were on the field, and there was Boston pretty much the entire rest of the series. And even in those minutes where Max was just eating everybody's lunch, there were way too many possessions where Boston was not able to finish no dodgeball situations because they tried to drive through people or they went for the only pass that was covered, just a little too impatient. They still need a little more just composure and cohesion, a ton of turnover on their roster. Washington is, I think, even more physical than Charlotte. So if Boston can find those looks that they need against no dodgeballs, then I think they would be the slight favorites. But if it's the same as it was against Charlotte and they're just trying to go through the point of attack or making the obvious pass instead of the kind of swing, then I think Washington has a great chance to win that series. I think this is, on paper, a much weaker Boston team than last year and a better Washington team. Obviously, paper only goes so far. We got to see how they actually play against each other. Max and Lulu are the great equalizer, and those are still going to be the two best beaters in the series. But I'm very excited to see Washington against Boston. I think it's going to be close.
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to be one of the better, series of the regular season for sure. I think one thing that can be a factor, you mentioned that UVA talent that's kind of finally descended upon this Washington program, which is very exciting. But I think the scouting report pretty publicly has been out that sometimes they're not the most disciplined players when it comes to staying out of the box. There were a couple moments in this series where Joey Bay once got called, a couple times did not get called for some pretty aggressive beating play that probably not need to happen in those moments. We know Zan Siddiqui, who was not playing this weekend, but playing the New York series, can also be prone to those. When you get into a huge match, trying to take down a team that is younger than it has been past years, but still has some of the greats of the game, players like Havlin and Chu. You can't make those little mistakes, and it'll be interesting to see if that could be a factor, in a series to come.
Yeah, I heard that one of the younger players in Washington saw one of their teammates get carded for back contact and asked one of the coaches if that was illegal. First time hearing that, apparently, which is just one of those funny things you happen with young teams sometimes. But yeah, staying out of trouble in that aspect is going to be huge, especially because young teams in general, and UVA specifically, had this problem 2 years ago more than last year. Physicality was how they tried to equalize against teams that had them outmatched, and they would overdo it. Physicality can be the great equalizer when done correctly, but if you're really feeling the pressure, you can overdo it very easily and start to rack up those cards. And cards are the thing that's going to make it really easy for Boston to get those half-court goals they struggle to generate if there's just a very obvious spot to move the ball because they have a one-player advantage. So keeping away from those, I do agree, is going to be a key in that series.
Yeah. On the Ottawa side, obviously, as reported earlier, they won't be able to make their Super Series. So it'll be a bit of a short season for this Ottawa team. But like I said, I do think definitely some heart was shown in that game, especially that game one. I mean, there was probably 10 minutes and they were only down 30, 40 points. I think they kind of lost the thread at that point, and the press finally started getting home for Washington. We'll hopefully see this team against Boston. But I don't think those problems are going to be, lesser playing in Boston against Havlin and Chu and the rest of that beater core. So obviously, I don't think we necessarily expect them to, make any big headways, but obviously, at least a solid showing from a team who, only gets to see American Quadball a couple times a year.
Yep, and you shouted out that World Cup is coming up. Obviously, it's huge for the various Team Canada players on both Ottawa and Toronto to get a little look at U.S. Quadball before World Cup comes around. So all good stuff.
Yeah. Also, I saw the Reddit thread about the announcer for that game. That is Darren Bell, former host of MLQ Network. Not many people have as much enthusiasm or energy as Darren Bell. Also, shout out to Darren. Did all of the tabulation and poll taking for our MLQ top players that we did in the off season. So that was Darren's work as well. Awesome. So with that said, we're going to bring in our second interview for the evening. From the Washington Admirals. I was told that I could refer to him as the water boy for the team, Riley Stars. Riley, thanks so much for coming on tonight.
Hey, Ethan. It's actually the equipment manager, but it's understandable that you might have got that confused.
That's fair. I think it's disrespectful to call an equipment manager the water boy. So
Yeah, I mean, exactly.
that is on me. So Riley, you've been with this program a while. We've kind of talked about all the different iterations of the Admirals over the last 4 or 5 years, players coming and going, young players coming up. What is kind of your opinion on the current team and kind of this very young group that has kind of come in to make a lot of the core of this group?
I mean, I think that they're great. One of my favorite things about playing for this team in particular is just that it's always different every year. Like you usually have like a core of people that stay the same, but it's so much fun to get to play with people who come in from different backgrounds. Or like DC is such a transitory city. Like people will get internships, people will get summer jobs, and it's like they pop in for a summer and then go back home, and it's like it's one of my favorite things about playing quad ball is that I get to meet so many people, and like I go to other events or I go to championships, and it's like, oh, I remember you. Like I got to play with you. I got to whatever. So that's great. But as far as this group in particular, it's super exciting. A lot of these people have been on our practice squad in years past. Chantal, I forgive me, Chantal. I don't know how to pronounce your last name, but Chantal, Nathan, Jun, and a couple of others have been on the practice squad in years past and are finally getting their chance to like show what they're capable of at the MLQ level. So it's really exciting, and I'm in the unique position of, I'm an 8-year veteran, I think, in the league at this point. And so, it's just fun at one point, I was the kind of like new player on the scene, and like I had these veterans looking out for me. And so now, I try and do what I can to help make them feel confident and comfortable, and just share whatever wisdom I might have, and hopefully help them enjoy playing MLQ as much as I have.
So you've obviously been, on Washington teams that have almost won the East Division and made it to this, semifinals of MLQ Championship. You've been on Washington teams that a lot of people didn't think were going to be able to like beat Charlotte and get third place in the division, though, as Ben alluded to, that's never really been the case when all is said and done. What was kind of the internal view of this season, with obviously Boston being a much younger team, New York obviously returning a lot, but having some changes as well? What was kind of the hopes and the goals or the expectations for this squad?
I mean, I know that John Gaffigan, our head coach, comes into like every series and he believes we can win every series. So obviously, that might not mean that we're the favorites, or that everyone else feels that way. But I think that the idea is that we're always looking to win every game, and I think that we have the talent to do that. But obviously, there's a lot of experience and a lot of talent on these other teams in the league, and it's such a quick season. Gaff is has a lot of concepts that he wants us to run, and a lot of things that are new to the team, and we're doing our best to put those pieces together, but it takes time to learn, and it takes time to get everybody who comes from different backgrounds and different systems to get everybody on the same page. So it's just about maximizing the output of our ability, which I think has been honestly the story of Admirals as an organization. It's something that I think if you've looked at some of the rosters in years past, people would be like, oh yeah, maybe they could go all the way, but we just sort of have historically not been able to maximize ourselves. So I think the idea is just to go into every series one at a time and just try and get better game by game.
Riley, you were touching on the team's transition under this new coach. What about for you personally? You've been an assistant coach the last couple of seasons. You're the head coach of DCQs and USQCs, and this year you're just a player plus the equipment manager, but you have the chance to just focus on you as a player. What's that been like for you, coming off several years of being in the coaching position?
Honestly, phenomenal. I am having like the best time. It's so great. I just like, I mean, obviously I'm the type of person who it's impossible for me to like not give advice or like coach when I'm there. So I'm always saying things. I'm always communicating. I try and make sure that my opinion is expressed and ask questions and give pointers when I can. But it's been fantastic for me, just like personally, to not have to be stressed about, who's going to make roster, who's going to, what kind of strategy do we have to do for this? What kind of lineup do I want to run? And coaching is a phenomenal experience as well in its own right, but it can be very stressful. It's incredibly rewarding, but it's very challenging. And it's been really nice to have this summer to just sort of focus on myself and be excited about being a player and just experience that joy for the game. And I'm hoping that I can keep elevating my personal skill level. It can be hard, when you're a several year veteran, to try and learn new things and continue to improve. But that is definitely going to be my focus, to improve my personal skills while I'm not as worried about everyone else.
What was we talked about how you guys come in every series feeling like you can win. You get swept in the first series, but now you have this sweep in your back pocket and you've got 2 big series coming up. What was the mood going into the series, and what's the mood coming out of it?
Well, one of the big focuses coming into the series was just, keep the aggression levels up, make sure we're doing what we talk about in practice, because I think it's easy to, when you have time to take breaks and you have the coach there, like giving you feedback after every play, or you can talk on the sidelines, it's very easy to like do certain things in practice, and then you get into the game and it's like suddenly you fall back on instincts that you've had when you've been playing for, however long you've been a player for. And so that was like a big emphasis going into this week. Just make sure that we're, executing what we did in practice, and continuing to improve on that. And in particular, we wanted to make sure that we were out of snitch range, because we know that they had a phenomenal seeker on their side. Obviously, mission accomplished, but it's always important, in the games, to just keep your foot on the gas. As far as going forward from here, Charlotte is coming up next. I think it'll be definitely a good test for the team. They've historically always played us close, like you guys talked about. We have managed to come out on top. I'm confident in the team that we can have that going forward. We have a few specific things that I don't want to reveal here, but that I've been talking to the coach about, and like we have some ideas for things that we've been struggling with, either on defense or on offense, that we want to try and add to our game, or things that New York did that challenged us, and come up with solutions to those problems as we continue to move throughout the season, because they're far from the only team who's going to really be able to push us and put us out of our comfort zone.
Riley, you mentioned, all the concepts that Gaffigan wants to, get involved with. And obviously, you mentioned some things you guys were try. Ben already kind of shout out the press you guys ran against Ottawa. A lot of MLQ seasons have kind of been defined by innovations, especially on the defensive side, thinking back through the years. So kind of what was the idea behind this press, and how did you guys feel about the way you executed this weekend?
I mean, I think that the core idea behind the press is just the best offense to have is always transition offense, right? Like, it's the highest percentage, it's the easiest to execute. And so like the core concept behind it is just like, let's get in that more. We have good and have always had really strong chasing talent on the squad. And so like, let's make use of that. Let's get in people's space. Let's try and get aggressive and potentially catch people off guard. Because I think, in quadball, especially as the hoop zone has become more and more popular, teams are just, used to having a lot of room to work with. And so if we can make people feel uncomfortable, so much the better. And then, like I already mentioned, we knew that they had a really strong seeker on their team. And if we could get a couple of extra points getting in transition to put ourselves out of reach, that was definitely what we wanted to do. So, and I think it's been going really well so far. I mean, obviously it always has hiccups, but I'm excited about what we're doing.
Cool. You kind of mentioned really wanting to put them away. What were kind of the vibes on the sideline in those first 8-9 minutes of game one, where things you weren't necessarily pulling away? I think it was like 80-40 or 90-40 at one point. Probably a good amount of the game overall.
I mean, I think the vibes on the bench all weekend were fantastic. Nobody really got frustrated. Honestly, it can be harder in a series where you are winning in dominant fashion in the first 2 games to maintain your focus. And so I think that if anything, the bigger challenge was just trying to make sure that we stayed focused and made sure that we were, ensuring that we're still learning and that we're still trying to be disciplined out there on the field and not just get sort of careless and carried away. Thankfully, we have a secret weapon Pride of Boston, Brian Mulcahy, on the team, who always make sure that we're staying accountable, the Patriot way, not goofing around, making sure you finish the job 100% all the way to the finish line. So we were able to keep that under control. But yeah, I don't think anybody was really sweating the beginning of the game 1 or even in game 3 when they actually had the lead for the first couple of minutes.
You heard us talk about the Boston series that's rapidly approaching, I think under 2 weeks away. Obviously going to be a big one given the format and how much getting second place in the division means. How you guys feel? You guys have been able to see them now. I'm sure you guys will start game planning. How are you guys feeling about that matchup?
Yeah, I think most of us probably agree that that's like, I mean, no one wants to look past Charlotte, but that is a huge challenge that's looming in the next few weeks. Personally, I'm excited to take it on. I always have fun playing against that team. I feel like we're confident, but we're not taking anything for granted. Like I said before, Gaff, we go into every series talking about we can win against this team. Nobody in this sport does anything that's that insane. That's that just completely untouchable. And so it's just about staying disciplined. You guys talked about Max and Lulu a lot, as you should. They're phenomenal players, and I think the key to that series for us is going to be, can we not turn the ball over? Because I think against New York, that's what killed us. Because honestly, I was talking to the team after that New York series, and I felt like we did pretty well in our half-court defense. Like, they were struggling to break us down a lot of the time, but the biggest difference in that series is that they would take advantage of us on offense and then get going in the open field in the other direction, and we just got buried after that. And so I think that for the Boston series, it's going to be the same type of idea. Can we stay disciplined, hold them to half-court offenses, not let them get in transition, and really grind the game out using our physicality and sort of playing to our strengths in that sense.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for taking the time this evening, Riley. Congratulations on the win and your own personal great series. And we'll look forward to watching you guys play against Boston in a couple weeks.
Thank you so much, guys. It was phenomenal.
All right, that will do it for another edition of MLQ Replay. A big weekend coming up here, one of the biggest of the year for Week 4. At 5 p.m. on Saturday, Toronto will be hosting Detroit in a series that might determine what team gets to go to MLQ Championship. At 7 p.m. Eastern, our series of the week, a classic rivalry in the sport as the New York Titans take on the Boston Forge. And at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, the Houston Legends host the San Antonio Soldados, two teams opening up their season, one with title aspirations. We thanks everyone for tuning in. Thanks to our guests for coming on, as well as Ben for hosting the show with me. We will be back next week, and we hope you join us. Best of luck to all teams competing this coming weekend, and we will see you next week.